Hello and welcome to another episode of Real Code. In this episode we're going to discuss building a simple web application and deploying it to Heroku. This video could be useful for those who plan on deploying a database based application to Heroku. In part 1 here we're going to build a simple web app containing a SQL database, which we will then use in part 2 to demonstrate deploying to Heroku. We will be using the Flask micro framework. We're going to use database, specifically SQLite for local database. We're going to use that just for testing, and then we will move on to use PostgreSQL. We're also going to use the SQL Alchemy, object relational mapper, and we will use very minimal HTML. In part 2, we will discuss deploying to the platform as a service, Heroku, and a couple other important topics which we will leave out in the interest of focusing on the database deployment are CSS to make the web application look pleasant, form validation, which is important for security and data integrity and a number of other reasons, and encryption, which is certainly important for data security. Alright, let's start by taking a look at the application we're going to be building today. I do have the Flask local development server running here in this terminal. To bring up the application, when the server is running, we navigate to the location, the URI of that server. We can either use the IP address or we can use the alias to that IP address, which in this case is localhost. And then we do need to specify the port number, which is port 5000. This is the application. It's very minimal. It accepts two user input fields here. Username and password. When the submit button is pressed, that information is sent to the server, the database is updated, and the database is then queried. That information is returned to the client, in this case the browser. That information is then rendered and displayed within the browser. We can test that out by adding a new user. I'm going to call this user 6 and give them a password of 6. When we press submit, you can see that the whole process I just described did happen. So the database was updated and it was queried and the new contents were displayed. Now that we know what we're going to be building, let's go ahead and start building it. I'm going to close the browser. I'm also going to use Control-C to stop the local development server. I'm just going to close out the terminal and we're going to start fresh here. I like to use virtual env to manage the dependencies, and we're going to go ahead and create a package called environments on the desktop, and another folder on the desktop here is going to contain our project. We'll call this DB app. Alright, I'm going to start by entering the environments directory. I'm then going to open a terminal window within that directory. You can see here the current working directory is desktop and environments. We can now use bash commands because we're in the bash shell. We can see that the directory is empty. I'm now going to go through the process of installing the pip package manager env. You just use the process of pip install and then so you can see here that I already had virtual env installed. I'm now going to use that to create my virtual environment. I'm just going to call it environment 1. So I just use the name of the package that we just installed and I specify the name of the environment that I'd like to create. So here in the environments folder that we were just sitting in, we've created a new directory. It's called env1, the name of the environment. It does contain several subdirectories, one of which is the bin folder. If we enter that, we can see that there's a file here called activate, and that is the script that we're going to run, which will activate the virtual environment that we just created. So in order to do that, we on a Linux machine use the command source, which will update the terminal instance here to reflect what we're about to do, and we're also going to specify the path to the activation script. So in our case here, since we're already in the environments folder, we're going to specify the name of the environment, the bin folder, and activate. If you look closely, you'll notice that the name of the environment appeared over here. So we do have that environment active. We can use the command pip list to show the currently installed packages in the environment. We have just the minimal standard packages here. Now would be a good time to install the packages that we will be using in our project. Today we're definitely going to be, pip install, that's how we add packages, and once again they will be added to this virtual environment because it is currently active. So we can use pip install to install Flask, which is the micro framework we'll be using to develop the web application. Flask does provide a local development server, which is not suitable for a production environment, but it does allow you to run the web app locally. So that's useful. It does provide the WSGI, the Web Server Gateway Interface, which we'll be using. Also, it provides some debugging functionality, and it does allow us to use Jinja 2 templating, which will allow us to use template inheritance. Potentially, we won't be using that today. That just facilitates code reusability, and we can also include Python commands within our HTML. So we're going to use Flask. We'll also be using WT forms. We'll just go ahead and install them, and we'll discuss them in more depth as we use them. We'll use Flask WTF, and we will use the ORM Flask SQL Alchemy to use Python-like syntax to interact with our database. Installing those packages, we can now use the command pip list to view the packages, and you'll notice that several additional packages were installed.